The original debt target I set out in my first budget has been met. We will end this Parliament with Britain's national debt share falling. The sun is starting to shine and we are fixing the roof.
It was George Osborne's last budget before the general election, maybe even his last ever. And perhaps unsurprisingly, it was arguably his most political budget yet, with more than a few sweeteners for voters to chew on.
Well, this is a hugely political budget. George Osborne's budget is obviously very political, but this one is taking place 50 days before the general election. He's got to convince the voters of two things, really. One is that the plan is working, and we saw copious examples of why he thinks the plan is working. It's going to be delivering, he hopes, a surplus in the last 2 years of the next Parliament. Unemployment is down again today. And lots of evidence that things are picking up for the British economy. But more importantly, from an electoral point of view, he needs to convince voters there's something in it for them, that the recovery means something. It's not just a set of random statistical data. This is something that means something in their everyday lives, and that's why it was aimed very much at people who remain to be convinced about George Osborne's motives. Whose side is he on?
Ahead of his speech today, the Chancellor promised there would be no gimmicks or giveaways, but he couldn't resist offering a little something to woo voters ahead of the May 7th election.
The winners in George Osborne's budget, definitely those in work who will benefit from a rising personal allowance and also an increase in the threshold at which you start to pay higher rates of taxation. Savers will benefit. They will receive a personal savings allowance which will allow much more of the interest they receive to be paid without tax being taken off first. Mr Osborne said that meant 95% of people will pay no tax on their savings interest at all. Those who are saving to buy a house will get a further bonus. The government will effectively reward them for saving. Every £100 they save towards a house purchase, the government will put in another 25. The losers, tax avoiders, as expected, lots more clampdowns on them. Mr Osborne talking about raising another £5 billion from cutting back on tax avoidance. That suggests lots of new changes.
He also had a message for big business.
I think it's a pretty canny budget, and it quite nicely balances pluses and minuses for business. So a good winding back of taxes on the North Sea following the oil price fall, which he had promised in 2011, but also an increase in the bank levy, which means that some global banks headquartered here may think, at least in their wilder dreams, of moving abroad. What I think he has delivered is a feeling that the Tories and the coalition have been economically competent.
After almost a decade of austerity, Mr Osborne's budget offered voters a taste of reward and the prospect of a brighter future if they back the Conservative Party in May. But the question is, has he done enough?
I think those people who've campaigned around generational inequality will be slightly disappointed that there was nothing really there to help renters. A lot of people are renting privately now, and there was lots of measures to help purchasers, but not much about renters. And also, some people had expected additional tax on the sale of more expensive properties, and there was nothing about that in the speech either.
Ultimately, despite the Chancellor's offering to voters, his budget promises could be redrawn by whatever party occupies Downing Street after the election. Vanessa Kortekaas, Financial Times, London.